Jungle House, Edelman! Throw into business!
I've been a fan of Street Fighter for as long as I can remember. In the 90s, I'd queue up at my local arcade to play against my classmates, friends, and whoever was up for a challenge. Street Fighter 2 was all anybody could talk about back then, and I was no different. I vividly remember waiting for each update to the game, from Champion Edition, to Turbo, to Super, to, well, you get the idea. Since those early days in the 90s, Street Fighter has been through a ton of transformations, from 3's gorgeous but then underappreciated pixel art, to 4's over-the-top facial animation and disturbingly large shoulders. But Street Fighter V lost me. Its rough launch, coupled with a slate of new characters I didn't care for, designs for returning characters that I just couldn't get behind, and a serious lack of single-player modes meant that I fell off the game before it gathered steam. Street Fighter V eventually found its way, but long after I and many fans like me had written it off. When news of Street Fighter VI started to come out, I was much more cautious in my approach. Though the early news was encouraging, single-player at launch, a robust story mode with seemingly RPG-like elements, and online multiplayer as good as anything the series had ever seen were all enticing, and the various betas performed well, but would the final product hold up? I've been playing Street Fighter VI for about 2 weeks now, and I've put the game through its paces. I've explored Metro City and beyond in World Tour, I've taken opponents online in the Battle Hub, and I've played through the traditional arcade-style content that started a lifelong love of fighting games in the Fighting Ground. As you might have guessed, Street Fighter VI is split into 3 sections, and that division goes deep. Battle Hub is the only mode fully integrated into the base game, where Fighting Ground and World Tour are removable in case you only want to play online multiplayer and would like to save some of your console's valuable storage space. On my PS5, I didn't have to do anything special to download Fighting Ground or World Tour, so you won't need to worry about not getting core game modes when you install the game. The first mode I chose to play in SF6, however, was Fighting Ground for that classic arcade-style hit. Fighting Ground houses several different match types, but arcade mode is going to be the main attraction here. I played through arcade mode for several characters, and it's about what you would expect if you've played previous entries in the series. You can choose between going for 5 or 12 fights, and the mode will be bookended by art explaining your chosen character's story arc. Depending on your performance during arcade mode, you can unlock various art pieces from Street Fighter's decades-long legacy, which I really enjoyed. Seeing high-quality scans of illustrations I used to encounter in gaming magazines from the fighting game boom in the 90s is really cool, and I also love that they reintroduced bonus stages. You can fight a truck from Street Fighter 2, or you could do the basketball parry minigame from Street Fighter 3, and I love that those have returned. I find myself gravitating to returning fighters so far, but I've been enjoying the whole roster. At launch, there are 18 fighters, 7 newcomers, and 11 familiar faces. On the returning side, you have Ken, Ryu, Chun-Li, Zangief, E-Honda, Dhalsim, Guile, DJ, Blanca, Juri, and Cammy. Each of them sports a new, aged-up design that feels more realistic and expressive than ever. I've been playing Ryu for nearly 30 years now, and this might be my favorite interpretation of the character. He's taken on a role closer to that of his master, Gouken, who officially debuted in Street Fighter 4. Zangief looks better than ever too, and I'm in love with Cammy and Chun-Li's new designs, to say nothing of the new characters. The newbies may need a bit more of an introduction. There's Luke, who is only technically a newcomer, seeing as he was Street Fighter V's final DLC character. Jamie is a master of Drunken Fist Kung Fu and a disciple of Yun and Yang from Street Fighter 3. Manon uses a mix of ballet and judo. Kimberly is a student of the Bushin Ryu style. Marissa is a powerful striker. Lily is a fresh new take on T-Hawk. And finally there's JP, who is the bane of my existence. I'm a big fan of the newcomers this time around. Overall, their designs are unique, interesting, and they fit in well with the returning cast. Some are certainly better than others. I'm still not a big fan of Luke. I feel that Capcom makes strange choices when it comes to trying to replace Ryu and Ken as the faces of the franchise, and Street Fighter VI is no exception in that regard. Of all the newcomers, Luke feels the least interesting, and his arms are just unsettling to look at. Even after a couple of weeks, I've barely scratched the surface of what's possible, and that's going to be true for months and maybe even years to come. As more players get their hands on the game, new tech will be discovered, the meta will expand, and tier lists will shift. Even in my limited online experience, I've seen techniques put together that I can't figure out how to counter, and I can't wait for players much better than myself to elevate the game. One of my favorite pastimes in 2008 was watching high-level competitive play in Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter V didn't have that same effect on me, but I feel that this latest iteration may bring me back into the fold. Street Fighter VI introduces some new mechanics in the form of the drive system. Along the top of the screen, just underneath the health bar, is the new drive meter, which serves a few functions. This meter provides a ton of new techniques, though most of them look familiar. There's the drive impact, which lets you tank a couple of hits in exchange for a crushing blow similar to Street Fighter IV's focus attack. Drive parry, which lets you perform a Street Fighter III style parry, though the timing is much more relaxed. You can just hold the buttons to parry just about anything, though your meter will slowly deplete as you do. You can also dash cancel a drive parry, which Capcom is calling a drive rush. This is pretty similar to the focus attack dash cancel from Street Fighter IV, but I still haven't mastered it yet myself. You can cancel special moves into a drive rush at a fairly hefty cost to your meter, but in practice I haven't yet been able to pull it off. Drive reversals replace Street Fighter V's V reversal mechanic with a unified input rather than unique commands per character. And finally, overdrive specials replace EX moves from previous games, though they're functionally the same. The drive meter adds a welcome layer of complexity to Street Fighter VI. Now your super meter is strictly for super moves. Having so many different mechanics tied to one meter may seem like a bit much at first, but it means you can't just spam any of these techniques without consequences. If you run out of your drive meter, you'll be left unable to perform any of those techniques, plus you won't be able to effectively defend against a drive impact from your opponent. At high levels of play, meter management will be one of the most exciting components of matches, and seeing how pros choose to use the various techniques at their disposal. Speaking of pros fighting each other, that brings me to the next major part of Street Fighter VI, the one that you can't delete from the game, the Battle Hub. The Battle Hub sits in the center of the menu and is the option selected by default. Realistically, over the course of Street Fighter VI's life, this is where players will spend most of their time. Capcom's provided a few opportunities for players to check out the Battle Hub ahead of time through a series of open betas, but if you haven't seen it, it's exactly what its name implies, a hub in which players gather and fight. You'll control an avatar of your own creation. The development team created a surprisingly robust character creator, allowing you to create just about anything you could imagine, sometimes to horrifying results. I tried to get as close as I could to an idealized version of myself and set off into the arena. Once you're in the hub, there are tons of things to do. The area is dotted with arcade cabinets for playing casual matches against whoever's around. On the outskirts of the hub, you can find arcade machines playing various games from Capcom's classic arcade lineup like Street Fighter II, Final Fight, and a ton of others. There are also clothing shops available in the hub for you to outfit your avatar with some fresh threads if that's your thing, and a tournament counter, though I didn't get to try that during the review period. I spent hours in here between the various betas and the review period and never experienced any lag or disconnects despite consistently getting error messages every time I started up the game indicating I would experience exactly that. Online play so far has been flawless, and if the betas are anything to go by, it appears that Capcom has learned from Street Fighter V's painful launch experience and built a robust backend that can handle an influx of excited players. It remains to be seen how Street Fighter VI's launch will go, but so far I don't have any reason to expect the worst. The Battle Hub is my favorite way to engage in online matches, especially when encountering those looking for a more casual fight, and it's made doubly better by the fact that you can hang out in the lobby and queue up for ranked matches if you'd rather stare at something other than the Fighting Grounds menu. There's one part I haven't yet discussed, however. You can step into the center ring of the Battle Hub to engage in avatar fights using the character you created, complete with moves learned in World Tour mode. These fights use everything you've achieved in World Tour to give you an advantage over your opponent. So let's talk about what that all means. I'm going to catch some heat for this, but in my opinion, I've saved the best for last. World Tour is my favorite content in any fighting game of all time. Full stop. I'm a sucker for well-crafted story modes in fighting games, and I love being able to add my original characters into my favorite video game universes. Street Fighter 6 does both of these things, and it does them better than any other attempt I can think of in fighting game history. I first fell in love with this idea way back in 1996 with Tobal No. 1's Quest mode on the PS1. The idea of a light RPG-style quest with fighting game mechanics was exactly what I had always wanted, and when Tobal 2 further expanded the concept, it cemented their place as two of my favorite PS1 games of all time. The concept was toyed with by various developers over the years, but Capcom has perfected the formula with Street Fighter 6. World Tour drops you off in Metro City. You know, the city from Final Fight, which early on in its development was titled Street Fighter 89 and was meant to be the sequel to the original Street Fighter. Capcom has loosely tied together the universes of Final Fight and Street Fighter, but now it feels so much more official. Running around Metro City in Street Fighter feels like a long overdue, full-throated acknowledgement of the game's shared history. So, how does it start? You arrive at Luke's training facility where you're taught the basics, how to move, jump, throw a punch, and so on. It's a typical fighting game tutorial, though you're initially forced to use the modern control scheme, a simplified version of traditional fighting game controls meant to reduce the barrier of entry for newcomers to the series. The traditional 6-button control scheme is reduced to 4 buttons, and combos can be executed by mashing buttons. As soon as I was able, I switched to the classic control scheme and haven't looked back. For me, Street Fighter just doesn't feel right with the modern control scheme, but I'm all for making fighting games more accessible. After a few hand-holding missions, Metro City is opened up for you to explore, and it's remarkable. The map, while not large by modern standards, is decent in size and is packed to the brim with stuff to do. You can fight nearly any NPC you encounter in the world, and the tradition from 3D open world roaming to 2D combat is seamless. It may not seem like much, but it's deeply impressive just how Capcom managed to pull this off. Combat encounters take place in precisely the same location they begin, meaning any part of the world can be used as a backdrop for an impromptu deathmatch, and NPCs in the background of those fights are the actual characters that were passing by at the time the fight began. It's so cool. Once your battle ends, you can even interact with and challenge those same NPCs to a fight. It's all part of the over-the-top, fight-centric world Capcom has created, and I love it. The weird nature of the side quests and the NPCs, coupled with the danger around every corner aspect, reminds me of the Yakuza series. It's a bold direction to take for a 2D fighting game, but it pays off so well. Throughout Metro City, as well as various locations around the world, you'll encounter new masters from whom you can learn various techniques. These masters are, as you probably have guessed, the current crop of World Warriors, from series staples like Ryu and Chun-Li to newcomers like Jamie and Lily. The more you train under a specific master, the more of their techniques you become able to learn. You can mix and match different techniques from the masters you've trained under to create a fighting style that's unique to your avatar. Underpinning all of this is an RPG-like experience system and skill tree. The more you level up, the more skill points you accrue. With those, you can unlock skills ranging from making items in shops cost less, to increasing your max HP or drive meter, or even allowing you to equip more techniques. The catch is that for each tier of the skill tree, you can only select one skill, locking the other permanently. Now, you can reset your skill tree if you want to make a change, so you can't really ruin your character, but I like the idea of each character being unique. As of the writing of this review, I haven't yet completed World Tour mode because there's just so much to do. Between side quests and story content, World Tour mode offers dozens of hours of enjoyment, and when you return to the Battle Hub after grinding in Metro City and beyond, the results of your training are going to be readily apparent. All the moves and skills you've unlocked can make for a lopsided challenge against someone who hasn't taken the time to explore Street Fighter's brave new world. So, where does this leave my opinion on Street Fighter 6? I think it's pretty obvious at this point, but in case it isn't, Street Fighter 6 is pure bliss to play. Working online, robust single-player options from an arcade mode to special match types, control options for both longtime fans and newcomers, and a single-player mode that finally puts Mortal Kombat to shame combined to make this latest Street Fighter one of the greatest entries in series history. Judging a fighting game these days is tough, but it's hard to imagine Street Fighter 6 as anything other than an unqualified success. With one of the strongest base rosters in history, multiple years of DLC planned, and returning fighters that are sure to delight old school fans, Capcom has positioned Street Fighter VI as well as it possibly can for success. I know that I, for one, will be playing for years to come.